At the moment we have 1.4 billion people without any access to reliable electricity. We've got billions of people relying upon biomass, bioenergy for their heating and cooking needs, but it's very unsustainable biomass in many cases, and it's actually causing huge health problems to those people because it's burnt in poor quality stoves, cook stoves. So the move towards a sustainable energy system it's a story of getting out of fossil fuels, which are risky. That we all see what's happening with the oil price. It's going up and down like a yo-yo. It's causing economic instability. We need to be moving away from this risky fossil resource to a cleaner, sustainable resource, which can power the world, but can also help to build sustainable energy for the poor at the same time. We're convinced that there is a much more attractive, cleaner energy future waiting for the world if we just choose to seize it. That's not to say that there won't be difficulties. There are jobs and there's money invested in high carbon industries, and that requires a transition. That will be difficult. That will need to be a just transition, and we need to be understanding that that there are jobs at stake in those industries. It needs to be thought through. It needs to be a transition, but without that transition, we're all in big trouble.
I mean, how do you feel about the people who insist on, for example, supporting climate deniers with bad science and try to stop this happening?
I think that we do have a very, very big problem in terms of the sort of the lobby which is resisting change. And in many countries they remain very powerful, they have good access, they have a lot of resources, and we have seen a lot of the tactics being used which are actually very similar to the tactics which have been proven to be unfortunately very effective for many years by people like the tobacco industry. The same tactics in terms of delay and denial that we're seeing on climate change are actually remarkably similar to some of the tactics that we've seen from some of the business lobby that stands to lose from this transition. Now the problem is that the problem you always face with the transition to a cleaner and greener economy is that the new voices, the winners in the green economy, are often smaller voices, or they don't fully exist yet, and the incumbents that are powerful and maybe tend to want to defend their existing territory. But that's the reality is it's much more complicated. There are now a growing number of voices within the business community who are really seeing that this transition is not just inevitable and necessary, but actually a potentially great opportunity to develop new technologies, to develop new markets, to be shifting the money towards clean energy. I mean, what we've seen over the past couple of years is actually that the proportion of investment globally going into renewables is shooting up massively. Renewables are now accounting for nearly half of all the investment in energy globally, which is great.
But can renewables really do the trick? I mean, we've always been told, oh, well, what about the day the sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow? I mean, is it really viable? It's viable,
but we need to design an energy system which is fit for the 21st century. And in terms of the issue about when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, this is where thinking differently about our energy systems and our electricity systems matter, in terms of having new grid systems which will connect up, for instance, wind farms in the North Sea to hydroelectric schemes in Norway or the Alps, to solar power schemes in the Mediterranean and North Africa. And if you look at those different parts of Europe, at any particular time, you might not be able to rely on one of those sources. But if you look at them all together, you have a package that really works. Mm-hmm. It's thinking differently about our energy and thinking creatively about it, and in a way which allows us to get out of fossil fuels.
So thinking in a kind of big picture way and joining up all those dots.
Yeah, but that does require a different way of working. It requires us to think across existing borders and boundaries, to think differently about things and to challenge the received wisdom. Everybody needs to play their part. And I think there are two ways that they can play their part. One is clearly by behaviour change. It's really important actually to be in the renewable energy future that I've just described. It's not just about renewable energy. Actually, it's equally important in terms of reducing our global energy demand, reducing our wasteful use of energy. A lot of that is by improving our energy efficiency. That's actually partly behaviour change. Actually deciding to really go for very good quality efficiency measures in your house, only buying the most efficient products when you buy a product. That's partly behaviour change. There's also behaviour change in terms of choosing to drive less or choosing to fly less, taking away the pressure on our unsustainable use of oil by actually thinking about what you do. That's vitally important. That really helps. But there are other things that we as individuals can't do as individuals. Right? We can't build a new European grid system, but we can create, using our voice as citizens, through our political voice, our campaigning voice, through joining with campaigning organisations to magnify our voice so that we are collectively heard, rather than heard as lots of individuals squeaking, heard as a body of individuals shouting that we want a cleaner future. But people, I think people also see that, they're concerned about their increasing energy bills because we're wasting energy. They're concerned about the costs of a high carbon future. We also see the costs caused by extreme weather events increasingly. So I think people are concerned about the here and now, the economic crisis, but they also see that there's a pathway out of the economic crisis, which is a low carbon pathway, which can create new jobs and bring in new industries to the UK and create new opportunities, for instance, here. Just in terms of a way out of the deep economic mess we're in.
So how come the politicians aren't talking about that so much anymore? They seem to a year or two ago, but how come it's rather gone quiet on that?
That's a good question. I think we should all make sure that we hold them to account. Only a few months ago, David Cameron, one of his very first things that he said when he came to power was that he wanted this to be the greenest government ever. That's a very noble aspiration, and we want to hold him to that. And we intend to.
How do we hold our politicians to account?
I think we need to be very clear about what good looks like. Good looks like a really, really good policy to help people cut their energy bills. There's actually legislation going through Parliament at the moment called the Green Deal. Now this potentially could be fantastic. This is a way of helping all of us, wherever we live, to do very major improvements to our homes to radically reduce our energy bills. But without having to pay what is quite a significant upfront cost by changing the relationship with the house and the energy supplier. So you have a long-term arrangement where you as a householder wouldn't have to pay more money. You'd have to agree to have a long-term relationship with a company who would turn your house into a much, much more environmentally friendly house. Now that's a great idea, but the problem is the government has got the great idea but isn't putting the ambition behind it, the money behind it, the legal framework behind it to really make it not just a nice idea, but something that would transform not just a small number of homes, but almost all of our homes. So it's about the ambition. We're lucky in the UK because we have a legal framework called the Climate Change Act that many of us all campaign very strongly to achieve. And this Climate Change Act is a great framework to actually force, the whole logic of the Climate Change Act is to give a clear sense of the transition the country needs to take in terms of moving out of carbon, but also to hold the government to account. So we can keep the government to account as organisations, as individuals, but also we can support bodies like the Climate Change Committee, the official body set up to do this, which is there to help us keep the government to account.
One last question briefly, Keith. Britain was the first country, I believe, to have a climate bill like this. Is it being picked up now by other countries as a good example?
Yes, I think it is, and I think that's really exciting actually. There's a lot of interest in the Climate Change Act in other countries in Europe, but also around the world as a model, because this isn't just about doing a little bit to reduce emissions next year. It's having a serious conversation about how we get out of fossil fuels. And that can't be done on a 1 year time frame. It's a grown-up conversation about what our country will look like in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 20 years' time, 30 years' time, and making it happen.